They spent months saying this moment would never come, that he wasn't ready, that he didn't belong, that the league had only humored him because of the last name stitched across the back of his jersey, a fifth-round pick, a project, a media experiment that would eventually be exposed once defenses caught up. And on paper, this night was supposed to do exactly that. December 28th, rain pouring down in Cleveland, a battered Browns team limping through a lost season, and standing across the field, a franchise that believed this game was a formality. Pittsburgh needed one win, just one. Win this, clinch the division, punch the playoff ticket, move on. The script felt obvious before kickoff even finished. Most fans had already written the ending. But what almost no one noticed was how quietly the pressure had shifted. Because for Shedeur Sanders, this wasn't just another start. It wasn't just about wins or stats or development reps. This was a referendum on his draft slide, on every analyst who said he was overdrafted, on every clip that mocked him as Coach Prime's kid instead of a quarterback in his own right. And more than anything, this was about whether the NFL would finally be forced to take him seriously. Across the field stood Aaron Rodgers, four-time MVP, Super Bowl champion, a quarterback who had been dismantling defenses since before Shedeur was old enough to drive, a walking resume, a standard for greatness. This was the type of matchup rookies are usually protected from, not thrown into with their reputation on the line. And that's what made it dangerous. Because when expectations disappear, fear often follows. But when doubt disappears, something else takes its place: freedom. Vegas didn't believe in Cleveland. The networks didn't believe in Cleveland. Social media had already crowned Pittsburgh before the opening kickoff hit the turf. The weather alone was supposed to be enough to bury any chance of an upset. Slippery field, heavy wind, zero margin for error. Exactly the kind of conditions where rookies are expected to panic. Yet something about the way Shedeur walked onto that field felt different. No theatrics, no bravado, no trying to prove a point, just calm, almost unsettling calm. The kind that makes veterans uncomfortable because it doesn't match the situation. The kind that suggests the moment isn't too big, it's exactly where he expects to be. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to stay locked in on all the latest NFL drama, make sure you hit that like button. It helps the video reach more people who love this content just like you. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another update, reaction, or storyline as it unfolds in real time. I also want to hear from you in the comments. What do you think about Shedeur Sanders' performance and the Browns' collapse? Drop your thoughts below and let's talk about it. And don't forget to share this video with friends who follow the NFL. Your support truly keeps the channel moving forward. And that's where the story takes a turn. Because what unfolded over the next 3 hours didn't just shake up a playoff race. It didn't just cost Pittsburgh control of its destiny. It didn't just give Cleveland a rare bright spot in a brutal season. It quietly cracked a narrative the league had been clinging to since draft night. That Shedeur Sanders was temporary. That he was surviving on hype. That eventually, reality would catch up. Instead, on a night designed to expose him, the opposite happened. A rookie everyone dismissed walked into a must-win game, stared down a future Hall of Famer, and forced the entire NFL to reconsider something they thought they already knew. And the most unsettling part: this wasn't supposed to happen yet. From the moment his name was called on draft night, the label attached itself and never let go. Fifth-round pick, not a steal, not a sleeper, a reach. The kind of selection that instantly splits opinion and invites skepticism before the jersey is even printed. And in Shedeur Sanders' case, the doubts weren't quiet. They were loud, public, and relentless. It didn't matter what he had done in college. The wins, the poise, the way he handled pressure. None of that led the conversation. The narrative locked onto one thing instead: his last name. To some, Shedeur wasn't a quarterback climbing the ladder. He was Dayan's son, a storyline the media could sell, but the league would eventually correct. Analysts questioned whether he would have been drafted at all without the Sanders legacy attached. Others framed him as a marketing decision, not a football one. And once that idea took root, Everything he did was filtered through it. Every incomplete pass became proof he was overmatched. Every interception turned into confirmation bias. Even his composure was criticized. Calm was mistaken for arrogance. Confidence was spun into entitlement. The same traits praised in veteran quarterbacks were framed as red flags when they showed up in a rookie wearing a famous name. The situation in Cleveland didn't help. A team buried near the bottom of the standings. A revolving door at quarterback. A fan base exhausted by false starts and broken promises. To the outside world, this wasn't an environment where a rookie could grow. It was a place where careers quietly stalled out. And when the Browns kept losing, the blame found him quickly, even when the problems ran much deeper than the quarterback position. By midseason, the conversation had shifted from development to doubt. Talk shows floated benching him for his own good. Online clips mocked his pocket movement, froze frames on missed reads, ignored the plays where he kept drives alive. The patience afforded to other rookies never seemed to apply here. Shedeur was expected to be polished immediately, and when he wasn't perfect, the verdict felt predetermined. What made it heavier was the silence around his improvement, the film room growth, the way his decision-making tightened week by week, the subtle command he began showing in huddles. None of that went viral. Struggle always travels faster than progress. And so the label stuck. A fifth-round mistake, a media creation, a temporary solution until Cleveland found the real guy. It followed him into every stadium, every broadcast, every debate. It was the invisible weight he carried into that rain-soaked night against Pittsburgh. Because for all the talk about legacy and bloodlines, the truth was simpler and harsher. Shedeur Sanders wasn't fighting defenses yet. He was fighting perception. Fighting the idea that his ceiling had already been decided for him. And the problem with labels like that is they don't just predict failure. They expect it. Which is exactly why what came next caught so many people off guard. There was something about this matchup that felt bigger than standings or seeding, even before the rain started falling. The kind of game that carries a strange weight once you step back and look at it. On one sideline stood a quarterback who had spent 2 decades defining Sundays. On the other stood a rookie still trying to convince the league he belonged. And hovering over it all was a history the NFL couldn't ignore, even if it tried. Rodgers didn't just represent experience. He represented survival. A quarterback who had outlasted eras, coaches, and critics. A player whose career began with doubt of his own, sliding down draft boards while teams passed on him one by one. That irony wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. All week, Rodgers spoke openly about seeing pieces of his younger self in Shedeur Sanders. He praised the patience it took to wait for an opportunity. He called the journey familiar. Respectful words, but words that also carried an unspoken hierarchy. Mentor, veteran, the established star welcoming the newcomer into the league. But the deeper connection sat just beneath the surface. 20 years earlier, a young Rodgers stepped onto an NFL field for the first time and learned how unforgiving this league could be. Across from him that night was Deion Sanders, not as a father, but as a defender who turned quarterbacks, mistakes into humiliation. Rodgers has said he remembers that game clearly. The speed, the pressure, the feeling of being exposed before you're ready. He survived it, grew from it, and built a Hall of Fame resume in the years that followed. Now the circle had closed. This time, Rodgers wasn't facing Deion Sanders. He was facing his son. And while the uniforms and positions were different, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. One generation stepping aside, another stepping forward, not officially, not ceremonially, but quietly in the way the league often does these things before it admits what's happening. The setting only added to the tension. A rain-soaked field that erased finesse and demanded toughness. A Cleveland team with nothing to lose. A Pittsburgh team carrying expectations heavy enough to snap under pressure. The game felt like it was daring someone to blink first. And for Shedeur, this wasn't just about testing his arm or reading coverages. It was about answering a question the league had been circling for months without asking directly. Could he hold his ground when the moment leaned toward history instead of hype? Because when young quarterbacks face legends, the script is usually cruel. The veteran teaches a lesson. The rookie absorbs it. The The broadcast frames it as part of the learning process. No shame, no controversy, just hierarchy reinforced. That's what made this night feel dangerous. Not because Shedeur was expected to win, he was, but because if he didn't fold, if he didn't look overwhelmed, if he even hinted at belonging on the same field as a 4-time MVP, the story would change whether anyone wanted it to or not. And once the ball was kicked off, it became clear this wasn't going to follow the script people thought they knew. From the first snap, something felt off, and not in the way Pittsburgh expected. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the field slick and unpredictable. Footing disappeared. Timing routes became gambles. This was supposed to be the kind of environment where a rookie shrinks, where mechanics fall apart and decision-making speeds up just enough to cause mistakes. Instead, Shedeur Sanders looked unbothered. No frantic feet, no rushed throws, no visible tension. He dropped back as if the conditions were perfect, scanning the field with patience that didn't match his experience level. Short completions came early, the kind that settle an offense and force a defense to respect rhythm before aggression. And with every completed pass, something shifted. Not on the scoreboard yet, on the sideline. Cleveland's offense didn't look like a group surviving the storm. It looked organized, purposeful, almost confident. Shedeur wasn't forcing anything. He wasn't hunting highlights. He was taking what the defense gave him and moving on without emotion, like he'd already processed the chaos around him. That calm spread. The offensive line played sharper. Receivers fought harder through contact. Even the play calling opened up as if the coaching staff sensed it too, that the moment wasn't swallowing their quarterback whole. Pittsburgh's defense, built to smell fear, didn't find it. And that's when frustration began creeping in. The first big strike came quickly, and it felt jarring because of how routine Shedeur made it look. A drop back, a clean read. A ball floated into the end zone through rain and traffic, landing where only his receiver could reach it. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't luck. It was touch. The kind that doesn't care about weather or reputation. The stadium erupted, not because of the score, but because of the disbelief. This wasn't how this was supposed to start. A rookie quarterback on a losing team against a playoff-bound defense in miserable conditions, and yet he looked like the most comfortable person on the field. What made it even stranger was what he wasn't doing. He wasn't celebrating wildly. He wasn't jawing. He jogged back to the sideline with the same expression he'd worn on the opening drive. Calm, focused, almost detached. And that unnerved Pittsburgh. Veteran defenses thrive on emotional swings. They wait for the young quarterback to get high, then crash, or get low, then press. Shedeur gave them neither. Each snap felt independent of the last. No carryover, no visible memory. Through the opening stretch, his numbers quietly piled up, but they weren't the story. The story was control. In conditions designed to create chaos, he was managing the game like someone who had lived through this moment before, even though he hadn't. And that's when the night took its first sharp turn. Because just as belief started building in the stands and on the sideline, the game reminded everyone how thin the margin really was. One decision, one split second, one mistake. And it was coming. It happened in a blink, and for a moment, it felt inevitable. The kind of mistake every critic waits for, because it confirms everything they already believe. Shedeur rolled to his right as the pocket collapsed, rain streaking across his visor, defenders closing fast. Instead of throwing it away, he tried to do too much. He turned his shoulders and sent the ball back across the field, a throw every quarterback is warned about before they ever reach the NFL. The ball hung in the air just long enough. A Steelers linebacker stepped in front of it, contact arriving at the same time, and the pass came loose. Interception. The stadium groaned. Somewhere online, keyboards were already clicking. This was it. The moment the night flipped, the proof that patience had been misplaced. The broadcast didn't hesitate. The replay looped. The decision was dissected in real time. A veteran analyst called it the worst choice of Shedeur's young career. Words like reckless and undisciplined surfaced instantly. The tone shifted from curiosity back to criticism in seconds. and then the cameras found Deion Sanders. High above the field, sitting in a luxury suite, he pulled his hat down over his face and leaned forward, unable to watch. The image spread faster than the interception itself. A father reacting not as a legend, not as a coach, but as a parent watching his son stumble on the biggest stage of his life. To many viewers, it looked like heartbreak. To others, it looked like confirmation, the weight of the moment finally crashing in. This was the spot where rookies usually unravel. One bad decision becomes two. Confidence tightens. Throws sail. The game speeds up just enough to spiral out of control. Especially in conditions like this, with momentum already fragile and expectations waiting to snap back into place. But something strange happened instead. Shedeur didn't slam his helmet. He didn't argue. He didn't stare down the sideline searching for reassurance. He jogged off the field, took his seat, and stared straight ahead. No visible panic, no frustration, just stillness. Cleveland's defense responded by doing its job, holding Pittsburgh to a field goal. The damage was limited. And when Shedeur took the field again, the question hung in the air heavier than the rain. Would that mistake linger? Would it change the way he played? Or would it become the turning point critics had been waiting for all season? Every snap after that interception carried extra weight, not because of the score, but because of what it represented. This was the moment that was supposed to expose him, the moment that was supposed to end the debate and reset the narrative. Instead, it did something else entirely. Because while the mistake showed what he still needed to learn, what followed revealed something far rarer for a rookie: the ability to absorb failure without letting it define the rest of the game. And that's when the night stopped being about talent and started being about something deeper. After the interception, the game changed its shape, not with fireworks or dramatic swings, but with restraint. The kind of football that doesn't trend online, but quietly decides outcomes. And this is where Shedeur Sanders did something most rookies struggle with: he adjusted without retreating. There was no sudden shift into conservatism, no visible fear of making another mistake. He didn't start checking down out of panic or forcing throws to make up for the turnover. Instead, he recalibrated. The reads became cleaner. The ball came out on time. If nothing was there, he lived to play the next down. It wasn't spectacular, but it was smart. The weather continued to deteriorate, turning the field into a test of patience rather than skill. Drives stalled. Possessions shortened. Every yard felt heavier than the last. In those moments, young quarterbacks often press, trying to break the game open with one risky play. Shedeur resisted that urge entirely. Third downs became his quiet battleground. Not with bombs downfield, but with precision. A quick slant to move the chains. A perfectly placed throw into a soft zone. A scramble just long enough to keep the drive alive before stepping out safely. Each conversion chipped away at Pittsburgh's confidence, forcing their defense to stay on the field longer, growing more frustrated with every stop that didn't fully materialize. Meanwhile, across the field, the dynamic flipped. Rodgers, the master of control, began to look uncomfortable. Pressure arrived quicker. The pocket collapsed faster. Cleveland's defense didn't give him clean windows, and the weather erased the margin for error he'd relied on for years. Passes fell incomplete. Drives ended quietly. The legend wasn't imploding, but he wasn't imposing his will either. And that mattered. Because when the game slowed into a grind, Shedeur didn't try to win it alone. He managed it. He trusted his defense. He trusted field position. He trusted that doing his job was enough. That kind of discipline doesn't come naturally to players trying to prove themselves. It usually comes from experience, from scars, from learning when not to swing. Time kept moving. The score stayed tight. And the longer the game dragged on, the clearer it became that Shedeur wasn't surviving the moment, he was shaping it. There were no dramatic celebrations, no chest thumping after completions, just steady body language, calm communication in the huddle. A quarterback who understood that control was more valuable than style on a night like this. By the fourth quarter, the narrative had flipped completely. This was no longer a story about whether the rookie would collapse. It was about whether the veteran could rise. And as the clock bled down, with every safe decision and every clean conversion, Shedeur Sanders was quietly doing the one thing critics said he couldn't. He was winning, but the game wasn't finished yet, and the final test was still waiting. With under 2 minutes left, the moment finally arrived, the one everyone had been waiting for since kickoff. Cleveland clung to a narrow lead. The rain hadn't let up. The crowd buzzed with nervous energy, and the ball was about to land in the hands of the man who had built an entire career on moments exactly like this. This was Aaron Rodgers' territory. No timeouts, long field, season hanging in the balance. These were the scenarios that had defined his legacy. The broadcast tone shifted instantly. This wasn't about rookies or draft position anymore. This was about inevitability, about whether greatness still bends reality when everything is on the line. Rodgers took the snap and went to work. A quick completion to move the chains, another strike over the middle, then another. The tempo increased, and suddenly Pittsburgh was marching. Each throw chipped away at Cleveland's confidence. Each reception felt like a reminder that experience still matters when the game tightens. The field shrank. The clock ticked down. The narrative leaned heavily toward familiarity. In the stands, belief wavered. Browns fans had seen this movie too many times. A late lead, a legendary quarterback, a defense asked to do just a little too much. The sense of dread was real. And then it started to crack. A throw toward the end zone sailed just off target, a near interception that sent a collective gasp through the stadium. The miscommunication was subtle but unmistakable. Rodgers and his receiver weren't seeing the same picture. On the next play, another incompletion. The rhythm vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Now it was 4th down. Everything on the line. One snap to decide division races, playoff paths, and legacies. Rodgers took the snap and fired toward the corner of the end zone, trusting timing and placement the way he always had. Cleveland's corner stayed disciplined, never biting, never panicking. The ball arrived, but the window didn't. No flags, no miracles, just silence, followed by an eruption from the home crowd that felt almost disbelieving. The legend had taken his shot, and it missed. On the sideline, Shedeur Sanders dropped to a knee, the outcome sealed. No celebration yet, just relief, just reality settling in. This wasn't about Rodgers suddenly becoming ineffective. It was about margins shrinking, about defenses catching up, about moments that used to tilt one way no longer obeying reputation. For years, quarterbacks like Rodgers lived in the space where belief carried them through chaos, where defenses hesitated just enough, where doubt favored the veteran. On this night, none of that mattered. The game had asked a simple question. Could the legend still impose his will when the script demanded it? And for the first time in a long time, the answer wasn't obvious. Because standing on the other sideline was a rookie who didn't flinch, a quarterback who had already absorbed his mistake and moved on, a player who didn't need the moment to bend, he just needed it to end. And with that final incompletion, something shifted. Not loudly, but permanently. The final whistle didn't just end a game. It set off a chain reaction the league wasn't prepared to deal with so late in the season. Within minutes, the focus shifted from the field to everything surrounding it. Playoff graphics were rewritten. Division scenarios flipped. A matchup that was supposed to lock things up had instead thrown the AFC North into chaos. And chaos invites noise. Pittsburgh's loss meant their grip on the division was suddenly gone. A team that controlled its own destiny days earlier was now starring at a winner-take-all finale. Fans didn't just react, they searched for explanations. And when expectations collapse, speculation always fills the gap. Online, clips began circulating almost immediately. One penalty in particular caught fire. A roughing the passer flag on Cam Hayward that some felt shouldn't have been called. Slow-motion replays, zoomed-in angles, side-by-side comparisons with unflagged hits from earlier in the season. The accusations followed quickly. Some fans claimed the league wanted Cleveland to play spoiler. Others went further, suggesting the NFL was protecting a marketable storyline. A Sanders winning on a national stage. A fresh face disrupting the hierarchy. No evidence, just theories spreading at the speed of outrage. And that distinction mattered. Because when the noise died down, the facts remained stubborn. Cleveland didn't score on that drive. The penalty didn't flip the outcome. The game had been decided long before conspiracy theories took over timelines. But in moments like this, logic rarely slows momentum. Inside locker rooms and front offices, the whispers sounded different. Coaches around the league took notice, not of the controversy, but of the composure. A rookie who didn't implode after a high-profile mistake. A quarterback who managed the clock, protected the ball, and didn't ask his team to bail him out. Those details don't trend, but they stick. Opposing players noticed too. Subtle comments surfaced, respectful nods, mentions of toughness and competitiveness, nothing flashy, nothing exaggerated, just acknowledgement that something had changed. And then there was the media shift. The tone softened, headlines hedged, phrases like "maybe Cleveland has something" replaced the earlier certainty. Analysts who had dismissed him weeks earlier suddenly added qualifiers: development, upside, growth. The same voices didn't apologize, they recalibrated. That recalibration said more than praise ever could. Because in the NFL, belief doesn't arrive with celebration. It arrives with hesitation, with pauses, with people quietly leaving the door open where it used to be sealed shut. And somewhere beneath the noise, another conversation was beginning, not about officiating, not about standings, about trajectory, about whether this game was a fluke or the first crack in a narrative that had been cemented since draft night, about whether a rookie once written off had just forced the league to adjust its expectations in real time. No one said it outright, not yet. But the whispers were there, and they were growing louder. By the time the headlines settled and the arguments burned themselves out, one thing became clear inside the Browns building. This win couldn't be treated like just another upset. It forced conversations that had been avoided for months, quietly at first, then more directly, because games like this don't just affect standings. They reshape plans. Internally, the quarterback room felt different almost immediately. Shedeur Sanders was no longer the developmental name penciled into the future. He was the present, a player who had walked into a pressure-heavy situation and delivered without melting down. Coaches don't ignore that. Front offices don't either. Trust is the hardest currency in the NFL, and in one night, he earned more of it than weeks of practice reps ever could. What stood out wasn't the stat line. It was the way he handled the moment. The mistake didn't define him. The conditions didn't rattle him. The opponent didn't intimidate him. Those are the traits teams search years for, often without realizing it until they see it under stress. Around the league, the perception shifted in subtler ways. This wasn't a coronation. No one was suddenly calling him elite, but the dismissiveness disappeared. The conversations moved from "can he survive?" to "what could he become?" That's a massive jump, even if it doesn't sound like one. The legacy talk also changed shape. Before this game, it hovered like a shadow, always there, always heavy. Every success was framed through Deion Sanders. Every failure was magnified because of him. After this win, the conversation began to separate. Not completely, it never will, but enough to matter. This wasn't a story about bloodlines anymore. It was about performance. For Cleveland, that distinction mattered more than anything. A franchise starved for stability doesn't need mythology. It needs reliability. It needs a quarterback who can absorb chaos and still function. This game suggested they might finally be looking at one. And for Shedeur, the implications were personal. This wasn't validation from analysts or respect from opponents. It was proof. Proof that the league couldn't ignore him anymore. Proof that the narrative written for him wasn't locked in stone. Proof that patience, discipline, and composure could outweigh draft position and noise. The schedule still loomed. Another game, another test. Nothing had been won in the big picture, but something fundamental had changed. The margin for dismissal was gone. From here on out, criticism would have to be earned, not assumed. Doubt would need evidence, not history. The safety net of underestimating him had been ripped away. And that's the real shift this win created. Not a moment. A direction. Because once a quarterback proves he can stand in the storm and remain himself, the league stops asking if he belongs. It starts watching to see what he does next. For months, the conversation around Shedeur Sanders lived in hypotheticals. What he was, what he might never be, what the league assumed would eventually happen once the spotlight got hot enough. Opinions stacked on top of each other until they felt like facts. And then one night in Cleveland cut straight through all of it. Not with dominance, not with spectacle, with control. This wasn't a performance built for highlight reels or debate shows. It was built for reality. Bad weather, limited margin, one mistake that could have spiraled into disaster. A veteran legend on the other sideline with a chance to take everything back at the end. These are the moments where reputations either crack or harden. Shedeur didn't need to win an argument. He didn't need to silence every critic. He just needed to do the one thing opinions can't do for you in the NFL. Finish the game. Rodgers walked off that field with questions trailing him. Not about his past, that's already written, but about how much control he still has over the future. The league doesn't announce transitions, it hints at them, quietly, reluctantly, and sometimes it lets a rookie deliver the message. Shedeur walked away with something far more valuable than praise: credibility. The kind that doesn't show up in headlines but changes how opponents prepare, how coaches speak, how front offices plan. The kind that turns maybe into we'll see, and eventually into pay attention. That's the difference between hype and proof. Hype needs protection. Proof stands on its own. The scoreboard didn't care about draft position. It didn't care about legacy. It didn't care about preseason rankings or midseason narratives. It recorded what happened. Browns 13. Steelers 6. One team walked away in control of its fate. The other walked away searching for explanations. And that's the part people struggle with. Because when a narrative collapses, it's tempting to look for excuses. Weather, officiating, bad luck. But when you strip it all down, the simplest truth is often the hardest to accept. A rookie quarterback everyone dismissed played cleaner football than a future Hall of Famer when it mattered most. That doesn't crown him. It doesn't guarantee anything. But it does something just as important. It changes the conversation. From this point forward, Shedeur Sanders won't be evaluated as a novelty or a placeholder. He'll be evaluated as a quarterback who's already shown he can survive pressure, absorb mistakes, and still deliver when the game demands it. And in a league that eats potential alive, that might be the rarest proof of all. Because opinions fade. But moments like this, they stay.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.